Thank you everyone for joining us for this morning's Dharma message. I'll start today's service with a moment of quiet sitting. I'll ring the bell and then we'll sit for a few moments and then I'll ring the bell again and we'll resume. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda, 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 Namanda. Thanks again for joining us for today's Dharma service, Dharma message. My name is CJ, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about gratitude and some of our Dharma ancestors, Shinran's family, Eshinni and Kakushinni. Since Thanksgiving was just a few days ago, I thought that this would be a good topic to think about. And Kakushinni and Eshinni are very important for our tradition because without their efforts, it would be difficult for us to have Jodo Shinshu as we know it today. Eshinni is Shinran's wife and was very supportive of his ministry throughout his life. It's likely without her financial support that he would have had a much more difficult time making time to be able to study the Dharma and to put together a lot of his research on Buddhism and the whole idea of Jodo Shinshu as we know it. And his daughter, youngest daughter, Kakushinni, was key to founding the Honganji, which started out as his Shinran's mausoleum, and she took care of him in the latter part of his life. So both of these women are really important for us as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. It's thought that Eshinni lived from 1182 to 1268, though the date of her birth is a little bit mysterious because for most of history, we didn't know a lot about her life. Much of her story was steeped in legend because there wasn't a lot of historical documentation. And it wasn't until 1921 that we really found out more about her life. In 1921, we found a cache of letters that she wrote to Kakushinni, who was living in Kyoto at the time. And these letters covered about the last 15 years of her life. They provide a lot of insight into the lives of Eshinni, Kakushinni, and Shinran. And it also gives us a look into what everyday religious life looked like for Pure Land Buddhists at the time. According to a letter from Kakunyo, who's a descendant of the Shinran's family, and also an important Jodo Shinshu figure, Eshinni bore 6 children, and she lived a lot of her life in Kyoto. She was well educated and an aristocrat. It's also very likely that her family extended to provincial rulers in Echigo and also in Kanto near what is modern-day Tokyo. Prior to leaving Heizan, Shinran had a vision while practicing walking Nembutsu meditation that Bodhisattva Kannon, or Avalokiteshvara, appeared to him and promised to take the form of a human and care for him for the rest of his life. Later, Shinran saw Eshinni as this manifestation of Kannon. They were likely married around the time when Honen, Shinran, and many of Honen's other followers were exiled. 2 of Honen's followers were even executed by the government at the time. Being exiled in Echigo, where Eshinni's family held strong influence, would have likely greatly eased the difficulty of exile for Shinran. After living in Echigo for several years, they moved to Kanto, and eventually they gave birth to Kakushinni, the youngest daughter. It's generally thought that Eshinni's family ties in these two areas provided a lot of support to their family. After some time, Eshinni began to see Shinran as a manifestation of Kannon, just like he saw her. And Kannon is the bodhisattva of mercy and compassion. So they clearly held each other in very high regard. And they probably really supported one another, both emotionally as a couple, but also spiritually as they shared important religious views. From the letters between Eshinni and Kakushinni, we have learned that this deep relationship was really important for both of them, and that their religious beliefs and convictions regarding the Nenbutsu path and universal salvation directed towards sentient beings from Amida Buddha was something that they saw as an event that was moving them forward in everyday life. Though the last few decades of their lives were apart, with Eshinni overseeing family and administrative business in Echigo, and Shinran working to complete his exegesis of Pure Land teachings in Kyoto, living with Kakushinni, we generally know that they still cared very deeply for one another. Their obligations to family and their faith prevented them from being together physically, but it seems that they still loved one another very much. Though Eshinni was an aristocrat and generally had a comfortable, long life, the later years when she was administering her family estates in Echigo held many difficulties, including crop failures, famine, and epidemics. The discovered letters give us a window into this part of Eshinni's life and her dear love for her youngest daughter, Kakushinni, to whom she designated heir of her servants. Many of her letters to Kakushinni reveal that though Eshinni lived a long life, she suffered from chronic illness and held a lot of heavy responsibility in administering her family's holdings. During this time of difficulty, Eshinni's faith and her hope for birth in the Pure Land were a motivating force through the tribulations of old age and separation from Shinran and Kakushinni. Kakushinni married one of Shinran's followers after the family moved back to Kyoto from Kanto. She and her husband Hino Hirotsuna had a son together, but Hirotsuna died only 7 years after their son's birth. Upon her husband's death, Kakushinni went to live with Shinran in Kyoto, where her son was able to learn from her father for several years before the son would join a Tendai monastery in Kyoto. During his final years, Kakushinni cared for her father. At the time, it was thought that when a person of deep faith died, miraculous events such as beautiful sounds, apparitions of wondrous clouds and lights, and various other inexplicable signs would occur. However, Kakushinni was concerned at Shinran's death and wrote, Eshinni in dismay that her father's death had occurred without such events. Eshinni wrote back in the following way. She said, "Let me assure you that I read your letter. Above all, concerning the birth of my husband Shinran in the Pure Land, nothing whatsoever new needs to be said." Eshinni followed this statement by describing Shinran's conversion experience when he was serving as a hall priest in Rokakudo. He was urged by a manifestation of Prince Shotoku to leave Hiezan and seek out Master Honen and learn from him to find liberation from samsara through the Nenbutsu path. She also describes a miraculous dream that she had where Honen and Shinran appeared as bright lights in a temple. In this dream, Honen and Shinran are explained to Eshinni as manifestations of Bodhisattvas Seishi, who represents wisdom, and Kannon, who represents compassion, respectively. Eshinni treats these explanations of her deeply personal religious experiences with Shinran to her daughter as incontrovertible evidence that Shinran had indeed been born in the Pure Land at the time of his death. and this was meant to assuage Kakushinni's concerns. This particular exchange between Eshinni and Kakushinni is very popular. It's been discussed in a lot of Dharma talks that I've heard. And it's one of my favorite family stories of Shinran and his family. And I like it for several reasons. First of all, we can see the significance of metaphysical or inexplicable religious experiences, such as manifestations of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in everyday life to convey a message. Whether or not we believe this personally, we can suspend our disbelief and see the impact that such events had on people of deep faith. These occurrences must have held profound significance to Eshinni and truly affirmed her faith in Nembutsu and the Pure Land. Personally, I think of occurrences like these in my own life where I've experienced an affirmation of my own faith due to the appearance of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. That may sound a little crazy, but I truly believe that Buddha has appeared to me. It wasn't quite as miraculous as the story that Eshinni tells, but everyday people have manifested themselves as Buddhas to encourage me on my own path. There have been times when I felt unsure or alone of my own journey, wondering what I'm doing and why I'm pursuing the ministry and the Dharma. But someone has always come into my life in inexplicable ways to encourage me and urge me forward. I honestly wonder how many of us, if we reflect deeply, can think of times like these in our own lives. Perhaps, like Kakushinni, we may not recognize them at first because there aren't any bright lights or miraculous signs. But Shinran was there throughout her life, guiding her. Maybe we all have folks like that who have guided us, and we just don't recognize them at the time. Another thing about the exchange between Eshinni and Kakushinni after Shinran's death is that our lives rarely ever live up to our expectations. Kakushinni was expecting miraculous occurrences at Shinran's passing, but he just died like a normal person. At the heart of Jodo Shinshu's teachings is the fact that we're all just ordinary people. Too often, we expect far too much from ourselves and from others. There may be surprising and miraculous events in our lives, of course, but in general, life is pretty mundane. We can always rely on Buddha's wisdom and compassion, but when it comes to relying on other folks, and especially when we rely on ourselves, we have to be careful not to set the bar too high. The third thing that I think that we can take away from this exchange between Kakushinni and Eshinni is the importance of gratitude and our ability to be present in the moment. Kakushinni was so worried about Shinran's birth that she might have forgotten all the moments they shared and all the lessons that Shinran taught her about Nembutsu, Pure Land, and the Dharma. Eshinni was able to guide her back to the understanding by reminding her of the incredible work that Shinran had done and the influence that he had had on both of their lives. After Shinran's passing, Kakushinni would go on to be a very important and influential individual in founding the Honganji as the site where Shinran's remains were interred. She and many of Shinran's followers would dedicate a hall to his memory, and from that sprang the organization which has helped to propagate Jodo Shinshu over the coming centuries, Honganji. With Thanksgiving being just a few days ago, I would say that today's Dharma message was very much one of gratitude. We give thanks to Eshinni and Kakushinni for everything that they've done, because it's very likely that without them, it would be hard to know if we could have Honganji or Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. I'd like to conclude today's Dharma message with a quote from Shinran in one of Eshinni's letters. Please join me in Gassho. Indeed, how I wish there could be one more time for me to see you and for you to see me while I'm still in this world. I myself will be going to the Pure Land of Paradise soon. There, everything can be seen without any darkness. So be sure to say the Nembutsu and come to the paradise with me. Indeed, when we go to paradise and meet again, nothing whatsoever will be in darkness. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda, Namanda, Namanda. Thank you for coming to today's Dharma message. I hope you have a great week.